Good morning, Psychology 200. So, as promised, here is lecture 7, based on chapter 7. This week we move into non-experimental research. Last week we were in chapter 6, which went over experimental research. So Paul Price went over when it's appropriate to use experimental research, when it's not appropriate, what types of studies benefit from the utilization of experimental research, etc. Also, for an assignment, we had a discussion board and we went over types of experimental research. So we went over the Stanford Prison Experiment. If you remember the Stanford Prison Experiment, you should also recall Stanley Milgram's experiment, the shock therapy experiment. We also went over the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in our discussion board. So again, as I've stated, this week we are moving on to non-experimental research. So jumping right into it without any delay, let me share my screen with you guys. Let's begin. So as usual, every PowerPoint that I put up starts off with some learning objectives. As you can see, there are some learning objectives here. The learning objectives, I want you guys to be able to do or to go back to them and refer back to them at the end of every single lecture or assignment or whatever the task is for the week. So go back at the end of your reading for this week. It's a very short week this week. Can you explain what a quasi-experimental research project is, and can you distinguish it clearly from both experimental and correlational research? Can you define what correlational research is and give several examples of it? Maybe also, can you give examples of qualitative research in psychology? Okay, so at the end of maybe listening to this lecture or reading the chapter or conducting your quiz, not conducting it, but actually taking your quiz, go back to the learning objectives. What have you picked up? You can also find these learning objectives on our Blackboard website. And again, I do an overarching umbrella type broad learning objectives on our Blackboard. So you can see it in week, specifically the one pertaining to this week in week 7. Okay? So before we get into what non-experimental research is, let me start off with some overviews of what, for the first section of the chapter, is going to entail, okay? So many important studies in psychology, for example, the Milgram Original Obedience Study, the shock therapy experiment, are not experimental. Experimental research does not involve the manipulation of an independent variable, the random assignment of participants to conditions, or orders of conditions, or both. The 3 important types of non-experimental research are correlational research, quasi-experimental research, and qualitative research. Your research proposals, many of you may end up doing a qualitative research project. And it's not because it's easier or whatever, it's because qualitative types of research, not only do I find that students end up conducting interviews, conducting focus group studies, but I would say gathering the data, collecting your data, gathering your sample is a lot more realistically obtainable through qualitative data, right? Whereas if you were to take a data set if you want to use a data set, you might have to go through an institution's security processes and policies. It's just a lot of work, right? Just to get your hands on already set data sets. Whereas qualitative research, right, you go through the IRB process as we went over in a previous chapter, and then you start collecting your data. I'm not saying it's easier. I'm not saying it. A lot of qualitative research takes months, takes years. But Again, we're going over non-experimental types of research. So see which one you might utilize in your method section, okay? So quickly, in section 1, Paul Price is going to define experimental research and distinguish it clearly from experimental research, and also give us several examples of non-experimental research. He's also going to explain when a researcher might choose to conduct non-experimental research as opposed to experimental research. So what is experimental research? Non-experimental research, okay? What is non-experimental research? Non-experimental research is research that lacks one or both of the key features of experimental research, okay? That is that it lacks either the manipulation of an independent variable, or 2, right? It lacks the random assignment or participants to conditions or orders of conditions, or both. While experimental research can provide strong evidence that changes in an independent variable and that causes differences in a dependent variable, non-experimental research generally cannot. Experimental research is appropriate when one has specific research questions or a hypothesis about a causal relationship, and it is both plausible and ethical to manipulate the independent variable. When to use non-experimental research? Non-experimental research is appropriate when these conditions are not met. So we're going to go over the conditions. There are many ways in which this is the case. 1, the research question or hypothesis can be about a single variable rather than a statistical relationship between the two. 2, the research question can be about a non-causal statistical relationship between variables. 3, the research question can be about a causal relationship, but the independent variable cannot be manipulated, or participants cannot be randomly assigned to conditions or orders of conditions. And then 4, the research question can be broad and exploratory, or it can be about what it is like to have a particular experience. Now to go over the types of non-experimental research. Non-experimental research can take the form of 3 broad categories. That is single variable research, correlational research and quasi-experimentation, and qualitative research. Research can be non-experimental because it focuses on a single variable rather than a statistical relationship between 2 variables. Therefore, it is also called a single variable research or single variable research. Again, single variable research is research that focuses on a single variable rather than a statistical relationship between variables. Research can also be non-experimental, secondly, because it focuses on a statistical relationship between 2 variables, but does not include the manipulation of an independent variable, random assignment of participants to conditions, or order of conditions, or both. Okay? This kind of research further takes 2 basic forms. Okay? Those basic forms are correlational research and quasi-experimentation. Okay, correlational research is where the researcher measures 2 variables of interest with little or no attempt to control extraneous variables, and then assesses the relationship between them. Okay, so correlational research, again, is research in which 2 or more variables are measured and the statistical relationship among them are assessed. There's no manipulated independent variable, and usually very little attempt at experimental control of extraneous variables. The second form is quasi-experimentation or quasi-experimental research. This is research where the researcher manipulates an independent variable but does not randomly assign participants to conditions or orders of conditions. So quasi-experimental research, again, is research that resembles experimental research, in that an independent variable is manipulated, but participants are not randomly assigned to conditions or orders of conditions. Typically, quasi-experimental research is used in field settings to test the effectiveness of a particular treatment. The final way in which research can be non-experimental is that it can be qualitative, okay? In qualitative research, the data are usually non-numerical and are analyzed using non-statistical techniques. Qualitative research is research that typically begins with a broader research question. It involves more detailed and less structured data collection procedures and summarizes the data in non-statistical ways, as I just stated. Internal validity revisited. So in chapter 6, we went over validity, reliability, and validity, okay? So a little bit of this might be review. So internal validity is the extent to which the design of the study supports the conclusion that a statistical relationship is causal, that changes in the independent variable caused any observed differences in the dependent variable, okay? So we're going to actually refer to one of the figures in our textbook. So this is from it's in chapter 7, so this is figure 7.1, so it's the very first figure that you encounter. Okay, so figure 7.1 shows how experimental, quasi-experimental, and correlational research varies in terms of validity. Okay, so I don't know how I can explain the purples, right? But I'll just describe it as is to the best of my ability. Experimental research, which is in the, I guess, more radiant purple. Experimental research tends to be highest because it addresses the directionality and third variable problems through manipulation, random assignment, and experimental control. Correlational research, which is in the darker purple, is lowest because it fails to address either problems. And then quasi, which is right in the center, quasi-experimental research is in the middle because the manipulation of the independent variable is addressed, but some problems aren't. Okay, so that's just, again, pause here, as usual when you get to figures, but that is what the figure is explaining to you guys. So some takeaways from this section is that non-experimental research is research that lacks the manipulation of an independent variable, random assignment of participants to conditions or orders of conditions, or sometimes both. There are 3 broad types of non-experimental research. Single variable research focuses on a single variable rather than a relationship between variables. Correlational and quasi-experimental research focuses on a statistical relationship but lacks manipulation or random assignment. Qualitative research focuses on broader research questions, typically involves more complex data, and involves non-statistical analysis of that data. In general, experimental research is high in internal validity. Correlational research is low in internal validity, and quasi-experimental research is in between. Okay. So the second section of our textbook goes into correlational research. In this section of chapter 7, Paul Price defines correlational research and gives several examples of correlational research. He also explains why a researcher might choose to conduct correlational research rather than experimental research or another type of non-experimental research. Okay. So in correlational research, the researcher measures 2 variables and assesses statistical relationships. So he assesses the correlation between them with little or no effort to control extraneous variables. Okay. There are essentially 2 reasons why a researcher would choose to conduct a correlational study rather than an experiment. The first is that the statistical relationship is not thought to be a causal one. And the second is that the statistical relationship of interest is thought to be causal, but the researcher cannot manipulate the independent variable because it is impossible, impractical, or unethical. Okay. The defining feature of correlational research is that both variables of interest are measured. Neither one is manipulated. Okay. So again, the defining feature of correlational research is that the two variables are measured, neither one is manipulated. This is true regardless of whether the variables are quantitative or categorical. Okay. Some approaches to data collection are strongly associated with correlational research. Okay. These include naturalistic observation and also the use of archival data. Okay, actually, let me put my face down here. Okay. So I'm like not in the way. So let's go into, again, naturalistic observation. Naturalistic observation is an approach to data collection that involves observing people's behavior in the environment in which it typically occurs. Naturalistic observation is a type of field research as opposed to a type of laboratory research. When it comes to naturalistic research, furthermore, we are precisely specifying the sample process that accomplishes three things, okay? One is that it makes data collection manageable for observers. A second is that the procedure can then be communicated clearly to other researchers who may want to replicate it, and it can provide some control over important extraneous variables. When the observations require a judgment on the part of the observers, the process is often described as coding. Coding generally requires clearly defining a set of targeted behaviors. And again, I have the definition of coding here for those of you who do not recall. Coding is an approach to measurement in naturalistic observation in which target behaviors are specified ahead of time and observers watch for and record those specific behaviors. Okay. The target behavior must be defined in such a way that different observers code them the same way. This is also known as inter-rater reliability. Another approach to correlational research is the use of archival data, which are data that have already been collected for some other purpose. Okay. So archival data can include school and hospital records, newspapers and magazines, internet content, television shows, and many other things. With naturalistic observation, measurement can be more or less straightforward when working with archival data. Paul Price also goes over content analysis. Content analysis is a family of systematic approaches to measurement using complex archival data. Content analysis requires specifying keywords, phrases, or ideas, and then finding all occurrences of them in the data. So some takeaways from the second section of chapter 2 is that correlational research involves measuring two variables and assessing the relationship between them with no manipulation of an independent variable. Correlational research is not defined by where or how the data is collected. However, some approaches to data collection are strongly associated with correlational research. These include naturalistic observation and the use of archival data. Okay. Going into now quasi-experimental research, okay? In this third section of chapter 7, so I think there are about 4 sections, I believe. Yeah, there are 4 sections in chapter 7. So in this third section, quasi-experimental research, Paul Price is going to explain what quasi-experimental research is and distinguish it clearly from both experimental and correlational research. He's also going to describe two different types of quasi-experimental research designs, non-equivalent group and pre-test, post-test designs, and identify examples of each one, okay? So quasi-experimental research. Quasi means resembling, if you guys can't recall, right? Quasi means resembling. Quasi-experimental research is research that resembles experimental research, but is not true experimental research because it lacks random assignment to conditions or orders of conditions. Okay, again, it is generally used in field settings to test the effectiveness of a treatment. Quasi-experiments are most likely to be, again, conducted in the field settings in which random assignment is difficult or impossible, okay? There are types of quasi-experimental research, okay? The first one is a non-equivalent group design, okay? A non-equivalent group design is a between subject design in which participants have not been randomly assigned to conditions. Instead, the researcher chooses two pre-existing groups that are similar to each other. So for example, two classrooms of students in the same grade at the same school would be an example, okay? Pre-test and post-test designs. In a pre-test, post-test design, the dependent variable is measured once before treatment is implemented and once after treatment is implemented. If the average post-test score is better than the average pre-test score, then it can be concluded that the treatment might be responsible for the improvement. But there are other explanations for why the post-test scores are better. One reason is history. History refers to the fact that other things might have happened between pre-test and post-test. Another reason, the second, is maturation. Maturation refers to the fact that participants might have changed between the pre-test and the post-test in ways that they were going to anyways because we're constantly growing and we're constantly learning. The third reason is regression to the means. This refers to the statistical fact that individuals chosen for their extreme scores on some variables, for example, depression, are likely to have less extreme scores when the variable is measured again. And then the fourth and final reason could be spontaneous remission. This refers to the tendency for many medical and psychological problems to improve over time without any form of treatment. Another example, another type, not example, but another type of quasi-experimental research is interrupted time series design. This is a research design in which a series of measurements of the dependent variable are taken both before and after treatment. We do have a figure 7.5, which is a hypothetical interrupted time sequence design. I want you guys to pause here, okay? This is our example of an interrupted time series design, again, which is another type of quasi-experimental research. And there are also combination designs, okay? Combination designs is a type of quasi-experimental design that is better than either non-equivalent group designs or the pre-test, post-test design is one that combines both elements. So combination design is a type of quasi-experimental design that is generally better than either the non-equivalent group design or the pre-test, post-test design is one that combines elements of both. So some takeaways before we go into our final section of chapter 7 is that quasi-experimental research involves the manipulation of an independent variable without the random assignment of participants to conditions or orders of conditions. Among the important types are non-equivalent group designs, pre-test, post-test, and interrupted time series designs. There are also designs that combine elements non-equivalent groups with multiple measures of dependent variables. Quasi-experimental research eliminates the directionality problem because it involves the manipulation of the independent variable. It does not eliminate the problem of confounding variables. However, because it does not involve random assignments to conditions. For these reasons, quasi-experimental research is generally higher in internal validity than correlational studies, but lower than true experiments. Okay. Our last section goes into qualitative research. Paul Price in this section will list several ways in which qualitative research differs from quantitative research in psychology. He's also going to describe the strengths and the weaknesses of qualitative research in psychology compared with quantitative research in psychology. He then will give us some examples of qualitative research in psychology. So moving on to this final section of chapter 7, what is qualitative research? Qualitative research, but first let's define quantitative research. Quantitative research has several general characteristics, okay, quantitative. It has a focused research question or hypothesis, a collection of small amounts of data from the population. It describes the resulting data using statistical techniques, and quantitative research is drawing a general conclusion about human behavior. Okay, so again, quantitative research is research that involves formulating focused research questions, collecting small amounts of data from a large number of participants, summarizing the data using descriptive and inferential statistics. Qualitative research, on the other hand, has several contrasting characteristics. Okay, it has a less focused research question. It collects a large amount of relatively unfiltered data from a relatively small number of individuals. It describes their data using non-statistical techniques. And this method is concerned with drawing general conclusions about human behavior with understanding in detail the experience of their research participants. So qualitative research is research that typically involves formulating broad research questions, collecting large numbers of data from a small number of participants, and summarizing the data using non-statistical techniques. Okay. The strengths of quantitative research are that it can provide precise answers to specific questions and lead to general conclusions about human behavior. The weakness of quantitative research are that it's not good at discovering new research questions, and it does not provide detailed descriptions of people's behavior and experience. The strength of qualitative research are that it does help research to generate new and interesting research questions, and it does provide detailed descriptions of people's behavior and experience. Data collection approaches in qualitative research are quite varied and involve naturalistic observation, archival data, artwork, amongst many other methods. Okay. One of the most common approaches to qualitative research is conducting interviews. Okay. Interviews in qualitative research tends to be unstructured. And for those of you who don't know the definition or don't recall the definition of an interview is a data collection method in qualitative research. Interviews can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured, which they oftentimes are, depending on how well specified the sequence of questions or prompt is. There is another type of interviews called focus group interviews. Okay, interviews that are conducted with small groups of participants are often referred to as focus groups because they are focused on a particular topic or issue. The interaction among participants in focus groups can sometimes bring out more information than a one-on-one interview. Another approach to data collection in qualitative research is participant observation, where researchers become active participants in the group or situation that they are studying. Okay. Although quantitative and qualitative research generally differ along several important dimensions, it is the method of analysis that distinguishes them more clearly than anything else. The grounded theory approach in qualitative research is a way to analyze the collected data. In qualitative research, using grounded theory, researchers start with the data and develop a theory or interpretation that is grounded in those data. The stages are as follows. Okay, they first identify ideas that are repeated throughout the data. Second, they organize these ideas into a smaller number of broader themes. And then finally, they can write a theoretical narrative, an interpretation, in other words, of the data in terms of the themes that they have identified throughout their data. Okay. Also, I do want to say that you can actually refer to, there's a specific table in our chapter that you can refer to in regards to the process of grounded theory. Okay. Quantitative and qualitative research in psychology and related fields do not coexist in complete harmony. Okay. Quantitative researchers criticize qualitative methods on the ground that they lack objectivity, are difficult to evaluate in terms of reliability and validity, and that they do not allow generalizations to people or situations other than those actually being studied. Qualitative researchers criticize quantitative methods on the grounds that they overlook the riches of human behavior and experience and answer simple questions about easily quantifiable variables. Okay. The first approach is that both methods, right, can be and should be combined into mixed methods research. So ultimately, what people and psychologists, we, right, sociologists, psychologists, social psychologists, what we should aim to do is aim for a mixed methods approach. Okay, that's combining both quantitative and qualitative. Okay. A second approach is to combining quantitative and qualitative research is referred to as triangulation. So mixed methods, this is what we should be aiming to do, is research that uses both quantitative and qualitative methods. Using qualitative research for hypothesis generation and quantitative research for hypotheses testing. Triangulation in mixed methods research is where we're using multiple quantitative and qualitative methods to study the same topic with the goal of converging on a single interpretation. So just some quick takeaways before I end this lecture. Qualitative research is important. It's an important alternative to quantitative research in psychology. It generally involves asking broader research questions, collecting more detailed data, for example, interviews or focus groups, and using non-statistical analysis. Many researchers conceptualize quantitative and qualitative research as complementary and advocate combining them both. So a lot of us advocate mixed methods, a mixed methods research project, a mixed methods approach. For example, qualitative research can be used to generate hypotheses, and quantitative research is to test them. Okay, so that is chapter 7, non-experimental types of research. Okay, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bye.